in America, we fought a war for independence, and what drove that fight was a distaste for a king that saw Americans as nothing but a source of income for England, a distaste for a monarch that was rooted in a couple of other factors such as we had no say in anything, as in being taxed on the whims of the English king, taxation without representation. But it was just not about taxes, it was also about wanting to control our own future. Americans lived in a world where England saw them as subjects and believed they had the power and the right to dictate the future of the colonies. And the truth is, up to 25% of the population in America at the time was just fine with that arrangement. The rest, well, they grew tired of being told what to do without a say in anything. And thus, America was born. But birthing a nation ain't easy, and while no one wanted a king, well, except for maybe Alexander Hamilton, who argued for an elected king, not a hereditary king, like a father, son, grandson, great-grandson, and so on for eternity. That's a hereditary king. And if you were paying attention in high school, you might just remember that George Washington was asked to be a king, to which he refused. But of course, the truth is a little bit more complex. The original story goes that military officers offered him a crown to gain some political stability. But what really happened is that one of Washington's officers wrote him a personal letter suggesting that George be king, a suggestion that troubled George and one that he absolutely refused to even consider. Now, like any story, there's always more to be told, and to old George refusing to be a king, well, there's a bit more to the story. After the Revolutionary War, there were a lot of pissed-off army officers that had fought for independence, officers who had been promised pay and pensions for their service, and they had gotten nothing. Now, because these war heroes never got what was promised, these officers started talking a new revolution, a military takeover of the new nation, and it came pretty close to happening till George Washington intervened. In a passionate speech, now known as the Newburgh Address, George Washington appealed to the officers' sense of patriotism, their duty to a new nation and the spirit of revolution, along with the promise to be their advocate in their fight to get the pensions that they were promised. Unfortunately, most of these soldiers never got much of what was promised to them, even with George Washington's advocacy, and that's because the fledgling nation just didn't have the money. The point in all this is that if George Washington was not the man he was, he would probably have established himself as a king. Most men just couldn't resist that temptation, and that is a friggin' truth. And I'm guessing maybe our Constitution would look a whole lot different. And by the way, if George Washington had been our first king, and if it was a hereditary monarch, this man, Richard Washington, George's ancestor, would be our current king. George refusing the crown of a king ain't the only story about people wanting a king in the new nation of America, because there was also an offer made to Henry of Prussia to be our first king. And of course you're thinking, who the fuck is Henry of Prussia? In what is known as a Prussian scheme, some forgotten politician by the name of Nathaniel Gorman suggested inviting the prince to become the first king of America, while our founding fathers were drafting the Articles of Confederation, the precursor to the Constitution. And that's probably why you've never heard of Nathaniel Gorman. Now, in finishing up this little video, the truth is that we only do not like kings, we also don't like dictators or anybody else espousing shit like communism, fascism, or any other ideology that tramples on our values. And yeah, that's exactly why a lot of people just don't care for Donald Trump's power grab. Yeah, that is my opinion, for what it's worth. Well, looky here, you made it this far. I'm just going to come out and say this. I think I myself, I feel that I'm in the same position that most Americans found themselves in 250 some years ago when they started the Revolutionary War. I don't believe there's one person, even though I might vote for somebody, I don't believe that once that person gets into office, he has my welfare in mind. I mean, he's more consumed with the next election cycle. And that means he needs money, and that means he's listening to the lobbyists and all the corporations and all the bullshit people out there that are going to throw money his way to vote in a specific way. But that vote is not going to be for my benefit or my welfare, and maybe I'm just so out of touch with reality that I don't know what the hell's going on anymore. But that is the way I feel. And I do think Donald Trump, if he was offered a kingship, he'd take it in a heartbeat. You know he would. But maybe I'm wrong. Could be, might be, but I don't fucking think so. So I'm going to do a shot of tequila. What do you think on that?